Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us bright and early as we kick off a full day, a packed agenda in this room, looking at pretty much every aspect of production and distribution of content from broadcast through to OTT as well. So, as Steve says, the way that we're going to kick off the day is very much, I think, a microcosm of IBC as a whole. In the discussions I've had with all of the panelists, a lot of us have been coming to IBC for a long time. When we first started coming, switches were the things that we looked at, and the streaming operations or the IP-based distribution part of the show was quite self-contained, quite small. Silently, over time, that proportion of the IP-based distribution component of the show now is a very, very, very large component of this industry as reflected in this show. So I'm very, very pleased to be joined by a range of perspectives across the European region here, from broadcast and also infrastructure providers. So let's just do a quick round of introductions here. So I'm Arun McVicker. I'm the principal go-to-market specialist for Edge Services at AWS. What that means is it's basically where the AWS network, where the cloud network hits the internet. I've spent the last 10 years or so trying to fix the internet in various different ways, and that's always been driven, well, ordinarily been driven by large-scale streaming events as a driver. So I've been very engaged in this space for a number of years. To my left, Paul Kane is the Director of Technology for partner platforms and distribution at ITV. ITV is the leading UK commercial broadcaster and also has ITV Studios, which produces content both in the domestic market and worldwide. Earlier this year, ITV launched ITVX, a leading streaming service, and Paul also owns the distribution of that streaming service to IP platform partners, and also is leading ITV's strategic program around this very topic, migrating from a predominantly linear world to a predominantly IP-based world. Dr. Thomas Stockhammer is the Director of Partnerships at Qualcomm. Today, Qualcomm does many, many very interesting things, but today I think we're going to be focused mainly on Thomas's interaction with the standards bodies that exist across the region, within the context of wireless as an additional method of delivery as we look towards solving some of the big problems that we're picking up or addressing in IP-based delivery. Then we have Frank Heineberg from RTL, so representing the German broadcast lens. When I was speaking to Frank has been on the journey that I just described in IBC as a whole, so coming from broadcast operations and engineering, and now being the Vice President for Standards, again, very much engaged in how RTL as a broadcaster is migrating from linear to OTT and IP-based delivery. And then at the very end, we also have Daniel Ekelof, who is the Director of Distribution and Infrastructure at SVT, Sweden's public service broadcaster, bringing that public service broadcaster lens as well as a different part of the region. So let's kick things off. So Steve very helpfully referenced the sort of kickoff point of this discussion, which is the scale of what is required to reach all of the viewers in all of the markets in all of Europe watching via their internet connection rather than DTT or a combination of the two. So ITV recently in the news referenced this as an analogy towards HS2. So High Speed 2 is one of the largest infrastructure projects in the UK. Its time horizon, it first started being spoken about 20 years ago, and at the current estimate, it will not be delivered for another 10 years. So we're speaking about a 30-year time horizon in that particular analogy. I'm interested, so Paul, talk me through how ITV relates that analogy and how we get back to what you have to focus on in your strategic engagement here.
Sure, thanks Rory. Hi everyone. So I mean, I think the HS2 analogy is really good actually, because it's really about the scale of the problem and the challenge that we've got ahead of us, but it's also about the complexity of what the challenges that lie ahead of us too. I think, if you look at the UK market today, there's already about over 4 million households who would claim to be IP-only households, so they only consume content over the IP. They don't have any sort of broadcast sort of capability in terms of DTT, satellite or cable. And that's really interesting. What we've seen with the launch of ITVX, we launched it just ahead of the World Cup, and we saw the largest audiences that we've ever seen in terms of our simultaneous audiences in there. I think one of the other things, though, is that when we think about this, we want to make sure that we give viewers a really good, easy experience to discover and watch linear TV in IP environments. And today that's quite difficult. You know, we look at platforms where we've got our ITVX app and the linear channels are available there, but you have to navigate through them. So we have launched in the UK on a number of different distribution platforms that are already pure IP platforms. So just as an example, Sky Glass and Sky Stream from Sky, and the TV Stream product from Virgin, and also from UView in the UK with our joint ventures UView. And so that's really good because it brings those kind of linear experiences together in one single aggregated user interface. But I think the challenges for me when we look at it from a technical perspective are just about scale and how do we manage that scale. So we've done a bit of back of envelope calculations just to try and understand if we think the largest audience that we had over the last few years is about 24 million concurrent viewers in the UK. If we extrapolate that out and say, let's say 80% of those viewers are watching an HD stream and 20% were watching a UHD stream, we work that out to be like 188 terabits per second of bandwidth that's required across CDNs and ISP networks. And we know that we're not there yet. We're not even halfway there.
Yep.
So I think there's a massive challenge there across the industry in terms of being able to increase the overall capacity. But I also think there's a challenge in terms of the consumer experience. So today, when we look at our OTT delivery, we live with latencies of between 30 and 45 seconds, and our target is to get to at least as good as DTT, right? We're not trying to sort of give a slightly less good product to customers in the UK. So that's one of the targets, is getting back to that kind of to that sort of latency. And finally, really, it's just about how do we do this in a cost-effective way and in a sustainable way from an environmental impact perspective. And so those are the big challenges that we're looking at and trying to work out today.
Great. I think that really sets the scene of, if we were to do it today, one of the things that I wanted to start off here, would it work? If we were to switch off the towers today, would we be able to do it? We can't. There is that time horizon of 30 years. We probably don't have that luxury, but there's a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of architectural redesigning probably that's required to get there. So, Frank, obviously in Germany, there's one of the interesting things about IP-based delivery, each market is going to be different in terms of its network characteristics.
Yes.
How does it keep you up at night, for example, this idea of the bandwidth challenge, the scale of infrastructure required, or is that something that you see a particular concern around, or is that something that you feel in your market doesn't hurt you as much or isn't as prevalent in your thinking?
Yeah, so good question. So let me start maybe with the question, if it's a revolution or an evolution we talk about, the transition to streaming, and maybe some words on the German market, on the reception of TV and media. So in Germany we have a very strong horizontal market. So we have more than 40% reception via satellite, another more than 40% via cable, and the rest is terrestrial and increasing IPTV. And all the broadcasters already use HbbTV as their hybrid technology. So we can reach 2/3 of all households via HbbTV. So in early years of HbbTV, broadcasters started to make hybrid experiments with providing catch-up services and all kinds of services in a hybrid way. And this was more or less the start of hybrid experience and streaming. And of course, every broadcaster has its own application. And in this way, when we started to talk about applications, we are of course all in the competition. And we as a private broadcasters are mainly in the competition with the big American service providers, let's say streaming providers like Amazon and Netflix. And so from RTL point, our main strategy actually to survive in this new world is to put a lot of energy in our own application, which is RTL Plus. And we are a media group in Bertelsmann division, and we have all kinds of media. And RTL decided to put everything in one application, and to make this big, and to hope that we can compete. And right now we share the third place in the streaming provider list in Germany. We share it with Disney Plus. First is Amazon and Netflix, and our aim is to keep the third place. And so our RTL application combines video streaming, VOD, a lot of interesting content, not only catch up, but very much focus on series and movies. We have live streams of all our 15 channels, including event channels with premium sport products. We have music included. We have a cooperation with Deezer. And so it's also a competition to Spotify. And the latest development is that we already also have magazines, print magazines in this application. And we hope that this powerful application, which already has 4.3 million subscribers in Germany, also in cooperation with the German Telekom, so of course it's also on their set-top boxes. We hope that this will increase and will be our main strategy asset for the transformation to streaming. And of course, from the infrastructure, I think it's well known that the German technical infrastructure in terms of fiber and also 4G and 5G expansion is a little bit slow.
Yep.
It's not on the top edge, and so of course this is a concern for us. Not at the moment, we haven't reached any limit, but I think in the long term it can be an issue. And of course, we are concerned of peak traffics and CDN costs in the future. Of course, this is what we all have to cope. But this is more or less our view. There's no alternative to go towards streaming, but it doesn't mean from our perspective that we want to switch off broadcast. We think there is still for the next years a good potential for cooperation of both platforms.
Yes, one thing we spoke about, Frank, in the preparation for this panel, obviously when you're in a transition, you pay for two things. So that's one thing that certainly I took on board in terms of how we can support customers make that migration to a new way of working while finding new commercial models potentially, or finding ways of aggregating the different services that we offer, that our partners offer, and supporting customers on that migration more effectively. So Daniel, one of the things that everyone in networking says is, oh, Sweden, they're fine because they've got such good bandwidth provision. It's like the future there. They'll be the first to switch off DTT and go fully IP. Do you feel that? Do you feel quite confident in your national infrastructure from a networking perspective?
Well, so the short answer is yes. But I think it's interesting what you said about the 30-year journey.
Yeah.
Because I think it's true. But I have the feeling that we are about 20 years into that journey. So we are on the journey already, and we spent 20 years doing that. So we've had, like you said, an evolution that has happened over quite a long time, which means that DTT is not going to go away completely, broadband is taken, but it's going slowly. And as we can see right now, yes, I am happy with the infrastructure, and the infrastructure is holding up. I was probably more worried a few years ago, maybe if you asked 5-6 years ago, oh, everyone's going to switch over, it's going to get congested, everything is going to go just break down. But that didn't actually happen. So the operators kept, adding bandwidth. We added some things, did innovation on compression and everything, and that point didn't happen. So actually we are in a pretty good situation where there's a transition. And being then 20 years into this, we are now more or less at the tipping point where we have more audience reach, more hours spent on IP than broadcast. And I think we will continue on this journey. And the only thing is that you have to have a different strategy, basically. So you have to work more with decentralization of your distribution than centralization. So the problem, in Sweden at least, doesn't exist in the edge close to the customer. It exists in the core.
Yep.
So as long as we can work our way out to the edge, we'll be okay for now, at least what we can see. Then if it happens overnight, of course, we have a different story, but we don't see that trend, right?
Yeah, well, I think we'll certainly return to that throughout the discussion, that idea of where is bandwidth plentiful and where are the constraints. There's a clear view there. But one other thing that just sprung to mind as you were talking through there is, we speak about better than broadcast. That's what we're aiming for. That's actually why customers are pushing us in this direction, because they found that when they had to leave the room but they wanted to keep watching the match, OTT offered that option. When they found that they wanted a more personalized experience, OTT offered that option. So I think it's important to ground the discussions. But we didn't just do this because we're technologists and we thought it would be fun. It's a really interesting dynamic in our industry alone, where the customer is completely defining our product And we've often been playing catch up in that way, which is a really interesting sort of dynamic of the whole conversation why we're here. But the other thing that sprung to mind is better than broadcast also means more visibility, more fidelity with your viewer. So one of the things that we know a lot more about what a viewer experiences when they consume our content through IP or OTT-based delivery, because we usually have an SDK in the client, we can see what's going on. We didn't ever have that with broadcast. So I wonder if sometimes we overstate how perfect broadcast was. Being someone who lives in a house where my DTT signal keeps on going, and I often switch to the IP-based method of delivery to fix it, I felt like throwing that in there is something that we should be mindful of. I think we are improving the core product of the industry by making the shift. So Thomas, you've got a pan-EMEA view, or a pan-Europe view certainly. What would be what you'd call out in terms of infrastructure bottlenecks or infrastructure considerations that maybe are variable, things that you've seen that are interesting across the region?
Maybe it's even more than Europe. I believe maybe quickly on Qualcomm. Qualcomm, we are building, our core service for the industry is building hardware technology for devices, predominantly mobile phones. So we are in billions of devices. And what is very important, this is not Europe, this is not US, this is global, right? So it's the same technology all over the world. That means even if Europe makes a decision, it's something which, if it's not aligned with Asia, it's costly. I can give you an idea. A video codec sitting on just the area costs around 40 cents, just beyond, because that's the area. So if it's used by 5% of the customers, they have to pay $20 to have it on. So everything what goes on there is very costly. So the first thing from our end is we need global technologies. So if you want to use hardware on your devices, if you want to go to mobile, it's not going to be Europe, it's not going to be US. So now what I do, standards come into play. So standards is one way to ensure global technology. So very keen on platforms being standardized. And so the next issue was basically, even in Qualcomm, we had an idea about media distribution. I don't know if people remember the times of media flow in like 2008. That's about the time when I joined. And we entered through an acquisition with a company who had an idea about distributing content over the internet. And we came and said, we need to change this. So we supported to develop standards to basically have an internet-based distribution, but still having standards, right? There were a lot of proprietary technology. Microsoft Smooth Streaming came up. There was other technology. So we supported the development of a standard for a global standard for internet distribution, which resulted in what is Dash now. And with a bit the convergence of CMF and HLS over the last couple of years, I think we have done a good job to have a global distribution standard available. So I think that's one aspect. The second one is we really wanted to make sure that we get in the mindsets and standardization a separation between the service and the distribution, because an MPEG-2 based broadcast distribution is a very vertical integrated environment. So you basically go from almost the service to the user to the physical bit is one vertical aspect. So separation of service from the distribution. I also believe there is good steps moving forward that we use any IP network to distribute different services. And now we look to do some service standardization. It's basically at the edge. Do you need a service standardization like DVB-I we're working in? Mm-hmm. Probably it's good because it helps to unify. But whether it's picked up by RTL, whether it's picked up in Europe, that's another question. But at least it's an idea to converge on a service layer. So I think we have, so I have been part of a great transition. There's a few new development we can speak maybe later, but the transition from, and also the idea to be able to get to any device, I think we have opened up this by separating service and content and basically relying on global technologies that are supported on chipsets throughout the world.
Yeah, I think the great thing that sort of comes through there is that even though customers are redefining our industry, they may still call that stream of the football match on their phone TV. So the idea there that you need, even though there's so much more variability in the delivery of this thing and in the consumption of this thing, you need a normalization factor to make it all hang together. So we'll certainly return to that standards discussion, and particularly how the device proliferation in OTT makes that more and more necessary. But let's just hone in a little bit more on that infrastructure question. The half of the capacity that we currently have that we will definitely need if we are to do this and be successful at this in the UK, for example. So the architecture of delivering a stream fundamentally hasn't changed for a long time. And it's a unicast-based delivery for the most part. Quite often the serving capacity for the CDN is at a peering point. The ISP capacity is over that drawbridge. Those are often contention points, those peering interconnects between the internet core and the regional breakouts of the internet into domestic carrier networks. I'm interested in learning from each of you about how you're thinking about this idea of how can we more efficiently use bandwidth? So bandwidth is plentiful at the edge. It is more scarce as you go to those peering points and to the internet core. What is it, Daniel, that you're looking at with your team, for example, to make more efficient use of bandwidth for delivery into all of those high bandwidth homes that exist in Sweden that I've heard so much about?
So basically what I mentioned about decentralization, so having a lot of options, connecting to the internet in many ways, basically, because every operator will have their own hubs, and we just try to get as far out in those networks and in those hubs as we can. So basically having a lot of options, more CDNs, more interconnects, and just, as I said, running a decentralized strategy to reach as far out as the edge as we can. So far in Sweden, we've been quite lazy that we have such good bandwidth that we don't have to do that so much. We can just run out of 1 or 2 centers and it's fine. I think going forward, we're going to have a lot more decentralization, moving into rural areas and putting our content closer to the edge, basically.
Yeah. How about, so if we go to the UK market, maybe there's a bit more of an, we've got to make up some more ground in where the capacity might exist. Multicast ABR is something that's gaining in discussion. It's something which doesn't currently have a defined standard across ISP networks. It's implemented in some ISP networks, but not consistently, I would say, across ISP networks. Is that a strategy that ITV are looking at? Is there interest there, or are there any other re-architectings of delivery that you're looking at?
I mean, I think we're definitely very interested in it because obviously it partially solves some of the problems around cost and the energy consumption that we're using if we can deliver stuff at the same time to a large number of customers. I think that's the thing, though. We've got a DTT network and it's operating very well, and it's likely to operate well for quite some number of years yet. And it's a very efficient way of delivering, moving pictures and audio to a large number of people at the same time. I think we're already live on BT's network with multicast, not multicast ABR, but just multicast on the UVIP products. And I think there's just going to be it's not going to be one answer fits all, right? So there will be a number of different strategies that we can look at. We certainly know that from some CDN providers, they think this is like, a natural evolution, and that the market will expand and the technology will address the needs of the market. But then also we're looking at things like, how can we do deeper caching into the networks to make it so that we get that content closer and to reduce the impact on the peering. So I think there's a number of different options that we're definitely exploring across the range.
Great. Yeah. So one of the aspects of my job has always been in various different companies negotiating with other companies for that peering capacity. Mm-hmm. And I think the gray area there is it's 2 investment decisions for just a CDN, for example, and an ISP. But those things they're not standardized, they're not consistent across all different markets as we look across the region. So there is this idea of how can we get beyond that from an architectural principle? And multicast ABR is obviously one way that we're looking at that. But I think, as you said there, Paul, for the next period of years, there will probably be 3 or 4 different technical strategies to get over what you may see as, so the internet runs on peak to mean principles, right? That's how everything's capacity planned. Yep. Well, if you have a World Cup final, that's not going to follow a peak to mean principle. You can't tell your customers, sorry, come back tomorrow so we can flatten out that peak. But some of the other strategies that exist that we can speak about, maybe Thomas, if we speak a little bit about, if you consider 5G broadcast, for example, as a viable strategy, as an additional layer to maybe multicast and unicast and all of these different things, or any other things that you're looking at
Yeah.
from Qualcomm's perspective?
No, I mean, multicast AVR is a good idea. I think that is something, but it is very deep in the network, right? So, and what is an important topic is that you really want to not change the service or the user experience by a new distribution. All of this needs to be completely transparent to the user. Right? You want to use your app or so all of this. So it needs to be seamless for the user. So what we did in 5G broadcast, and I mean, that's a term, and maybe there's a bit of a confusion what that is. So give me maybe 30 seconds to explain what this is. The basic context is that 3GPP, from a standards perspective, has identified that there is significant interest from what is referred to as verticals to come to 3GPP and work with this huge industry to create new platforms or use the same platform to create services on top of this. So the whole automotive industry came to 3GPP and say, we want to use your platform. And the same happened in like 5, 6, 7 years ago, that in particular the European broadcasters came to 3GPP and say, we will have an infrastructure, so a high power, high tower or infrastructure, maybe also with medium networks. But on the UHF spectrum, we want to use this to go directly to mobile. But we don't want to define the technologies, because when we do it, it will never get on your platform and devices. So we want to go with what we want, and please develop a technology such that we can get onto the devices. That happened, and that's basically 5G broadcast. So it's a technology not for the mobile network operators. It's predominantly for the broadcast network operator, for the broadcast, to use their UHF spectrum, which runs terrestrial TV, T2, ATSC in the US today, to basically partially or completely use it to also access mobile devices. So in that extent, it's not going to a gateway, it goes directly into the device, so it's built to go directly into the device. Successfully, we are able to demonstrate this already today. So there's no commercially ready chipset or no phone, but as the technology is defined to be so close to the existing capabilities of what the function is, we are able, just by modifications on some firmware and so on, to have like hundreds of test devices already. And you see quite a few demonstrations here at the IBC showing 5G broadcast. Again, what has been done, and I'm very grateful to people like the Austrian broadcaster, the ORS, very innovative and so on. They build a platform that allows you to integrate an app there, your unicast app, completely seamlessly, so you would not recognize that there's a broadcast distribution in between. So it's basically boosting up the capacity and allows you to serve then peaks and so on and so on. In the long term, there is no reason that technology cannot be replacing and going directly to TVs as well. So it might be a way, for example, to solve your peak capacity. And at the end, it's giving you a lot of flexibility, because you can trade off, do I serve the mobile, do I go to the TV? You can scale up and potentially, and maybe if your football match comes up, you use most of the capacity for some time going and distributing this on highest quality, but then maybe you go more to background file distributions or use it for other purposes. I think it's an excellent tool to be given to content providers, broadcasters, service providers, to use it to scale up their network. So one of a few options, as we said, and multicast AVR is another one.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking with Daniel yesterday, when we came into this topic, again, you return to the idea that you need options, because the internet is so variable. When we have, with DTT, we know that something is going to be on the screen, and we have high confidence there. In the case of a public service broadcaster, if there is a fiber cut, if there is something significant which wipes out a large part of your capacity, you may need options, particularly if it's a news item of national interest or something like that. So this idea of options, I think, is really what underpins like the architectural reinvention of this delivery phase that we're in now. We've spoken a lot about infrastructure. Frank, let's get into standards a little bit more. So what are the standards that we've spoken already a little bit about it, but what are the standards that you're most focusing on at RTL in order to make this transition easier for your company?
Yeah, so we're very committed to standards, But of course, standards and also the technology behind it have to fit to your business models. And let me bring in one argument. As a private broadcaster, our main revenue is selling advertising. And so we have to make sure that all the technologies we choose are ready for the latest technologies, also for targeted advertising. So we started years ago to provide targeted advertising clip to ad insertion, ad substitution with various technologies, just to make a bit of improvement in this area for our ad agencies. And in the best case, the consumer would also have a value of this because he gets ads he's interested in, and it's a seamless replacement of ads. So we use a couple of technologies, and for server-side ad substitution and also for client-side ad substitution. For client-side ad substitution, it's mainly based on HbbTV and HbbTV-TA, which is a brand new technology. You can use it in combination with broadcast. So you have a broadcast channel, and via HbbTV-TA, you can replace single spots and via broadband. And this brings us to the discussion of which you raised earlier about multicast ABR. Multicast is definitely in the network an option to improve the efficiency, but currently, as I learned, it wouldn't fit to our technology how to replace advertising. So there's no way actually to do it, and it makes life much complicated. And this is why we would rather stick to unicast and say we have to improve the unicast infrastructure. And another argument maybe against multicast is that one big provider, German Telekom in Germany, just decided to go the other way. They provided unicast for years and now go to unicast. They provided multicast, sorry, and now switch to new technologies based on unicast. So it seems that that multicast therefore is maybe too complicated and also limited to closed networks, and maybe this doesn't fit to the modern world. And so I think in terms of standard, come back to a question, for the next years we need hybrid technologies to cover the transition, streaming and also broadcast. And I think this can be done with 5G, this can be also done with DVB-I and also in a combination of both. And I can invite you all to go to the DVB booth or the EBU booth. You see the latest demonstrations of the new standard DVB-I, which brings a user experience as you know it from classical TV, EPG, but you can mix it with streaming services, VOD services, with broadcasts. The broadcaster can decide which instant has priority. It's a very flexible model, and we think it can be one of the major solutions for the next years for the transition. To find the right balance between having the bandwidth for the big events, for the World Championship finals, and also providing opportunity for small broadcasters to start without paying a satellite transponder. I think DVB-I is one of the favorite standards we actually support, beside all the ATV standards as mentioned earlier, and in the best case they fit together.
Great. Thomas, maybe you can carry the baton on there for standards. Particularly, what are the standards that you're seeing that are helping customers accelerate their path along this migration?
Okay, so I mean, there's many standards, and it's always the question what serves the purpose of the standard, right? So where does it create the economy of scale? For us, a very important part is, if it goes to hardware, we need a standard, because we will not. We absolutely try to avoid to not implement. So, like a video codec is a very central issue, right? So that's an important standard. If you go to the next generation, there's a cycle of 10 years. It also needs to give improvements of 30, 40, 50. So it needs to give significant improvements, capacity, and so on. So that's one part. What I'm hearing is there is then. Obviously, we have been building a standard like Dash, which significantly helped to roll it in scale, but then you get to the issues. Ad insertion, so a DRM is an important issue. There's always issues about DRM, and there is topics that relate to other aspects but generally, I believe it's important that people come together with their requirements and understand that a standard will take some time to develop, and that's often missing. This is a bit of a problem. You have a problem now, give me the standard. That's currently not working. So it's also a problem of the organizations. They might be too slow. So we need to basically, on the standards, quicker react to industry needs. What we also learned, and we're doing a lot of work here, and I'm grateful to DVB, to 5G MAG, Dash AF, these are organizations we're part, to not only build just specifications, we built tools around this, reference tools, open source, so people can immediately pick it up, test it, and trial it. I think that's an important aspect as well. So there needs to be this combination of a development of a standard and the development of reference tools and so on. So I work also with AWS colleagues. We want that FFmpeg adds the technology so that we have a reference and so on and so on. Then you can migrate it over. So these are topics that I believe, and ad insertion, low latency, DRM, I think these are core aspects, and we need to get better on that one and invite everyone to participate, and then we need to find ways in the standards body to deliver quickly and agree that this moves out. But these are core aspects, I believe, from a media point of view.
Absolutely. Going back to the whole conversation around unicast and multicast, one of the things fundamentally that we're doing is we're creating more personalized experiences. One of the benefits of the road that we're driving on is everyone gets their own version of the thing. So that creates all of this challenge, but also all of this this need for standardization, particularly when we have a device estate that's in the hundreds now that all of you need to support. Let's finish things off with a last question, maybe an appeal to the audience and the broader industry. So we are all on this journey together. I'd like to ask each member of the panel, what would you ask for from the industry in terms of how can they help you, or how can we all help each other navigate this path successfully on an expedited timescale? So Paul, starting with you.
Yeah, sure. So from ITV's perspective, we are really, really keen to collaborate and work with industry partners. We obviously recognize we can't solve this problem ourselves, so we really absolutely want to work with partners. I think just some real world examples of implementing standards. You know, we've gone through and done quite a lot of work with the ESAM interface standard around SCTE 35 and stuff like that. And it was really, really tough to actually get stuff to work together with lots of different components from different partners. So I think that's really the main thing, is that we understand this as an industry-wide problem, and it will have to have an industry-wide solution to help us get there.
Great. Thomas?
Yeah, I mean, I said a couple of things. We really invite people to participate in open standards discussion, come with an open mindset. But let's then move quickly and complete the things. But also, as for us, accept that it's not only Europe. We need to look this globally, in particular if you look at technologies that are very much need to scale on like devices. So go beyond just Europe, just look at also globally. It needs to work for China, US, and so on and so on. So these are a couple of aspects which runs in a while hard to understand when we ask, why do you not put this on your phone? Well, it's maybe just Europe, right? So also understand the global perspective. I think it's important. Thank you.
Yes. Frank, how about you?
Yeah, a little bit echo what Thomas said. Come together in industry corporations, help that standards are going on, because mostly it takes a lot of time, as Thomas mentioned, and it's always a hand and egg issue. Who starts to believe in the standard, and do we have the reach as a broadcaster to implement services? We need the reach, otherwise it's not efficient. So this is one point. And the other, I would say, let's all think about how we can use the bandwidth more efficient. I think there's still a lot of potential in encoding, in content encoding, in using new codecs, which makes us easier to use the unicast networks in the way we want to do it.
Great stuff. And Daniel?
So I think we're quite far ahead of actually having a distribution that is working any given Tuesday. What I still feel is not completely there and might be solved with standards and more optionality is that it's working all the time, and it's reliable, and we can run it at any given moment, even when we have a crisis or even floodings and wars and everything. That's where I see that the IP distribution is not there yet, and that really is a hard problem that will take the whole community to solve, and it will be a mix of optionalities and standards, I think, to do that.
Perfect, thank you. I did have a special question, which was for each panelist to say the date that the last DTT household would switch off their television and never have that method of delivery again. But I don't think we're ready for that yet. We're on the journey, but we're not quite at that point of proximity to the end of it. Thank you so much, my panelists, to Paul, to Thomas, to Frank, and to Daniel, for a really, really insightful discussion on what I think is the topic of our time in this industry. So thank you all for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your show.